So I wanted to start with context because we're talking about privacy audits and that word is used in many contexts. And so I just want to be clear to start off on the same page that I'm talking about the audit of a system, process, or product based on stated objectives and looking at evidence to see if controls are working, not talking about an investigation to determine what went wrong or a regulatory investigation or a code review or a pen test. So why are we talking about a privacy audit? Well, maybe you are in-house privacy professional, you were selected for privacy audit, maybe you are hiring a service provider to do processing on your behalf or with you. Maybe you're subject to GDPR, fulfilling obligations as a data processor or a DPO. Maybe you're Canadian or you just like Canadians and you like to follow the guidance of our privacy regulators. In the Getting to Accountability Right guidance. There's lots of reasons why you might be interested in privacy audit. Maybe you are one of the many companies who are subject to an FTC consent decree that says that you have to hire a third party to do annual audits for a given number of years as part of your settlement. So what is a privacy audit? I'm going to start out by grossly oversimplifying this, and at the end of my talk, you will understand why I'm working so hard to keep it simple, because it is work. An audit answers the question, do we have evidence that this thing was doing what it said it would do? So let's break that down. Do we have evidence? We being the auditor, that's somebody who's qualified, independent, and working on behalf of an organization. Audits are done by auditors for organizations, they're not for individuals. And evidence in an audit, if there's no evidence, it didn't happen. Even if the result or the outcome is correct 100% of the time, if you can't document how it came to be, it can't pass an audit. Okay, this thing, do we have evidence? This thing has to be narrowly defined. The scope could be a system, a process, a product, or an app. It's not the organization as a whole. Audits are backward looking and cover a defined period or point in time. And so was it doing what it said it would do? This is important. Audits check against stated objectives. And generally those are not set by the auditor because the auditor must be independent. The objectives could be set by the auditee or a privacy framework. And I'm going to give you a specific and real example of this in just a moment. But just to be very clear about what an audit does and doesn't say. It does not answer the question, is this thing trustworthy? That's neither specific nor objective. It doesn't answer the question, does this thing work? Because an audit's backward looking. So the closest we could get is to have evidence that it was working. All right, so if it doesn't say all of that, what does it say? I'm going to show you an example. This one is ripped from the headlines. It is the PwC audit of Facebook in 2017. And I'm using this one not to pick on either of those companies, but it is a rare example of an audit report being publicly available. They're restricted use and they're subject to strict confidentiality requirements. So usually we don't get to see them unless we're part of the intended audience. This is also a great example of the limitations of privacy audits, given this opinion was issued while Facebook was aware of a data leak to Cambridge Analytica that led to a $5 billion settlement for Facebook and scrutiny about the independence of auditors that are hired by the auditee. So let's go slow. In our opinion, in this case, PwC is the auditor. As part of the FTC settlement, Facebook had to hire a qualified independent auditor, and that's what PwC is. Facebook's privacy controls. These are mostly redacted, but we do have some controls related to third-party developers, and I'm going to show you those in just a moment. We're operating with sufficient effectiveness. Now, we don't have PwC's test procedures, but generally when testing controls, the auditor is going to figure out the total population, choose a sample and set a tolerance, and there are methodologies for doing this, and they're going to look for evidence to see if that control was working based on that sample. So a simple example of this would be related to data subject access requests or DSARs. You'd want to test the control around verifying someone's identity before releasing data to them. You would look at the total number received, say it's 100, choose a sample, say 10, and then you'd look at evidence to see if in those 10 instances, the person's identity was verified. Maybe you have evidence in the form of an attestation or a copy of information that they provided. Okay, this next part, this is where lawyers get involved. I'm tight on time, so I'm not going to read out the whole thing. Basically, this is the what it said it would do part that I said earlier. Was it doing what it said it would do? We're going to come back to this. This is the caveats. This is what narrows that scope. And is it doing what it said it would do? Based upon the Facebook privacy program set forth in management's assertion. And in this case, we have management's assertion. Okay, here's what that looks like. Facebook discloses covered information to third-party developers only for the purposes identified in the notices and with the implicit or explicit consent of the individual. So Facebook wrote this. PwC didn't write this, FTC didn't write this, and it didn't come from one of the frameworks, one of the privacy frameworks that I'm going to discuss in a moment. Facebook set this bar for themselves. So I'm going to summarize here. But you can read this, the full report is available online and the slides will also be available. Basically, controls include having policies in place, requiring the third parties to agree to the policies. In some cases, a manual review was required, and also obtaining consent and limiting the disclosure based on that consent. PwC tested these controls. Again, we don't know how, but they determined that for that given period of time that they were operating effectively. So that's an example of where the auditee sets the bar for themselves. What if they had instead used a privacy framework? So there are a number of privacy frameworks. I have 3 of my favorite ones linked here on the screen, and they're all linked. Starting with the AICPA trust services criteria. That's my favorite one because deep down in my heart, I'm still an auditor, and I worked on its predecessor, the generally accepted privacy principles. I like this one because it has a lot of illustrative controls and it shows you how to test them in the associated guidance, and it's free. I love the new NIST privacy framework. And since we're at an engineering conference, I'm sure you love it too. And I saw in the chat, there were some questions about it with the last talk. I love this one because it really goes further on explaining and requiring the company to look at risk and data control. And then finally, ISO 27701 is also a very popular privacy audit framework. It's extremely robust. It's much more global in nature. It's quite well aligned with GDPR and other privacy laws. But what I don't like about it is that it's a little bit expensive. It's proprietary. You have to pay for it. Okay, so what if we used one of those frameworks instead of Facebook's management assertion? It's not my day for this. Okay, sorry. All right. Controls around the policies are consistent between Facebook's management assertion and all 3 frameworks. It's what we expect. It's the foundation of pretty much any control, is that it is documented and formally defined. Okay, next step, next requirement in the Facebook's management assertion was around agreements and commitments. And here we start to see things a little bit different. So all of them require agreements to be in place. The AICPA framework goes a step further to require ongoing due diligence around compliance with the contract and taking corrective action if it isn't being adhered to. Consent was another control. Here we also see a difference. All 3 of Facebook, Trust Services, and NIST required consent to be obtained and then respected. You only disclose data in accordance with that consent. But under ISO 27701, we see a requirement for downstream notification of changes. So if you've been working with GDPR, that's not unfamiliar to you. And I said before, ISO is much more aligned with GDPR. So this is where we start to see the differences. And then finally, and I think this one's really important, management's assertion at Facebook did not cover records of disclosure. And that does not mean that they don't do it. It just wasn't in scope for this audit. Had they chosen to audit against one of these frameworks, they would have tested controls around keeping track of who was receiving the data. And so you can see how that looks in all three of those frameworks. So are privacy audits effective? Well, let's ask a question about the question, or a meta question, if you will. Do we have evidence that this thing was doing what it said it would do? When we think about the audit, did the audit tell us whether those specific controls in the management's assertion were operating sufficiently, not perfectly, as they related to that specific data that was in scope for that specific period in time? According to PwC, they did have that evidence. And so I think that the audits did what it said it would do. Audits have a purpose, and they also have limitations, and that's clear based on the outcome, which was that this audit cleared the privacy practices despite the Cambridge Analytica leak. If you look at the follow-up audit, which was done by a different firm called Protiviti, you see it being a lot more critical, and you see more robustness in the management's assertion. So hopefully I have done the thing that I said I would do and provided you with a satisfactory primer on privacy audits. If we've got time for questions, I would love to hear them. Otherwise, I'll communicate with you in the Slack.